So, before we end, maybe it's a good time to ask if there's any comments or questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the group you talked about, that was for PIs?
The question is the group for PIs. So the first groups were for PIs, and now there's also groups for that started by graduate students and by postdocs. And a lot of times you have to invent what it means in your own institution. And the thing is that they go through in group. By the way, I want to teach you another thing about groups. There's like this classic phase of group dynamics. There's enthusiasm stage. Then there's the stage of disillusionment, and then so in the first meeting 15 people come, second meeting 2 people come, and then if you get through this bottleneck, it kind of grows again. So there's definitely groups of sometimes graduate students can't get funding for a workshop, but they can still open it just by themselves. You don't have to have the workshop. So did that answer your question? Yeah.
So I'm actually a member of one of these groups.
You're on? You are?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
And we're a little bit in that, so we were actually the people who wrote the book every other
You're from every other Thursday?
No, I'm not in it. They gathered up a few of us youngsters that basically we have to do this.
So
This is at Berkeley.
Berkeley, so they told you, why don't you organize your generation?
They told us, they took us out to lunch.
They took you out to lunch.
They told us how they started it. They
Okay.
gave us a set of rules.
They gave you rules? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we met, and it followed exactly the curve you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where it was, classes were really good for
Yeah.
a while, and there was a lot of structure, and then there was a little bit of turnover.
Yeah.
People left.
There was enthusiasm, turnover.
Yeah, we lost some structure. And so I guess all I wanted to say is I think the structure is really important.
Yes.
And so this book, or maybe information, so
Right.
I think many of us need to vent.
Yes.
And
So you say many of us need to vent. Just repeating so everybody hears.
inventing is really useful.
Yes.
But the great thing about the group is that you don't just vent, you have make a commitment to do something about it.
Yeah, that's right. So the group is not only venting, it's making a commitment to do something about it.
And so I think having structure
Yeah.
is
Thank you. So yeah, so there's resources or essays and books, etc., about structure and how to do it, and of course people who are into doing things like that. So we've got to. One more question, comment? I'm not gonna. Yeah.
So in a lot of institutions, you have like postdoc clubs or PhD clubs, but this is about science, right? You meet when someone gives a talk, ask questions, but you're not talking about this. You're talking about something separate, which is only about the social aspects of.
So I want to see if I understood. You're saying that there are postdoc groups that meet and talk about science? Yeah. So commonly there's the journal clubs for postdocs, etc. That's great. And these groups, there's like you discovered, there are more interesting things to talk about. Even though groups of postdocs for science, like I said, social relatedness, sometimes that supplies. So some people's advisor isn't into their project, but their peers are. So that's really very important. So, but in these groups, usually talk about how to lead when I'm not in charge, how to get the resources they need. What are my resources? How to get the resources they need in order to survive the postdoc and to thrive in the postdoc. How to deal with uncertainty. So postdoc is very vulnerable. There's uncertainty, a lot of uncertainties. There's lack of structure in postdocs, right? So and also all the other things. How to give talks. How to apply the job search. That's a universal experience that peers can really help you with.
Are we collecting data perhaps on how these groups are, on what impact they're having? I think an interesting concept you brought up earlier was that there is data, for example, on mentorship styles and on teaching and interesting theories that then reflect, what are more effective ways that keep people excited or make them feel accepted or part of a team.
Yeah.
And then to the extent to which we establish that in an academic context, are we collecting data on what happens to these PIs? For example, what fraction of them go on to some of the academic goals, or just self-reflection of their state of happiness and what they do?
So the question is, are you collecting data? Maybe collecting data, maybe there's a case for doing research of a certain kind on groups like this and more generally in the process of doing science. And I think that's a wonderful suggestion. So we're not collecting data, and There's, of course, you also mentioned something about happiness and success. So there's two goals here. One is well-being, and I think very few people will argue that that's a value worthwhile, even just for well-being. And the question of like getting tenure, for example. So sitting on tenure committees, they can tell you that people don't get tenure not because they're not smart, not because their science is wrong. It's because they fail with students. Students don't want to come to their lab. The students in their lab, they're not doing the projects. Why? Because they don't have motivation. Why? Because the mentor is failing on the subjective and emotional side. That's why you don't get tenure. So I don't know the research, but that's my subjective observation. So I'm guessing that learning about this might help. Or maybe people who are really good at it can get much better. Some people don't want to hear about this, and that's fine also, and they can succeed, etc. Sometimes the people who most need this don't want to hear about it, and that's a little bit frustrating. But people who are interested in it can grow tremendously. So I started giving terrible talks, like speaking too fast, etc. And I learned how to give talks, and now I teach how to give talks. So you can really improve. I'm telling you, on my own experience, it's possible to improve by orders of magnitude. So since we started such a low, or something like, what's our, how many bits have been So I want to finish with a song about work-life balance. Work-life balance actually means work-life separation. I want to tell you that in my scientific life, I recognize the power of taking time off, vacations, sabbaticals, not working on weekends too much, etc. And that's me. Some people, it's good for them to work all the time. I think that it shouldn't be a given that to be a scientist you have to work all the time. That's my opinion. But and this is a song about, it's called Sunday at the Lab. I kissed my wife and kids farewell. I must go back to run my gel. I'm going to spend another Sunday at the lab. My wife said, Uri, you gotta promise you love me more than doing science. I said, honey, could we discuss this another day? Down at the lab. My mom said, son, don't waste your life. Go home and spend time with your wife. You must have learned this from your father. Why can't you be more like your brother? No son of mine spends Sundays at the lab. My dad said, son, you need a shrink. The shrink said, son, you need a drink. Those Rorschach spots reminded me of blocks. He said, oh God, you obviously have an obsessive compulsion, or maybe it's a compulsive obsession to spend all your Sundays at the lab. My wife, she left me, my mom disowned me. The shrink pretends he doesn't know me, but I can't be myself without some buffer on the shelf. So if you need me, you can phone me at the lab. I'm gonna spend another Sunday, I'm gonna spend another Sunday, I'm gonna spend another Sunday at the lab. Go on, onwards, and change the culture of science. Yes!